The U.S. Air Force is quietly tearing up one of its oldest rules. Since World War II, the sacred number has been 22, the size of a standard fighter squadron. But now, that foundation is being shattered. Since 2024, one unit has been swelling far beyond regulation. What began as a routine F-16 squadron is mutating into something unprecedented, a Super Squadron, a force that could field 60 fighters or more under a single command. Why risk unraveling decades of doctrine? The answer may lie not in the planes, but in the place they're being sent to. On the morning of July 31st, 2025, an odd tension hung over the flight line at Kunsan Air Base. The crews knew this wasn't just another day of flying the usual training loops or patrols. Engines roared, ground vehicles scurried, airmen shouted orders. F-16 Fighting Falcons lined up one after another and clawed skyward, turning north toward Osan Air Base. The movement of jets and personnel, a relocation just 50 miles from the demilitarized zone that has split the Korean Peninsula since 1953, marks a new step in what the U.S. Air Force calls the Super Squadron experiment. The project technically began in October of the previous year, when planners in Washington and Seoul quietly greenlit a trial. The idea was to take a regular fighter squadron, swell its size well beyond the standard template, and then measure if the bigger unit could deliver more firepower with fewer constraints. Now, with dozens of jets lifting from Kunsan and airmen packing up shop to follow them, the experiment enters its most visible phase. The scale is obvious when stepping onto the ramp. Rows of F-16s stretch into the distance, maintenance tents spill into every corner of the base, and the once familiar squadron culture is reshaped by the sheer density of people and machines. Captain Bryce Hughes, an officer in the 51st Maintenance Group, puts it plainly, quote, "We're running a force optimization test. The goal is to see if one big squadron can generate more combat power and do it more efficiently than several smaller ones. For 2 years, this will be watched closely. On paper, the trial is scheduled to wrap in October 2026. In practice, it's rehearsal for how the U.S. may structure its fighter units in a future clash in the Pacific." For most of its history, the U.S. Air Force has organized its frontline unit around a remarkably stable template, the 24 warplane squadron. That number, which today often manifests as 22 active aircraft, is not an accident, but the result of decades of operational trial and error. The origins go back to World War I, when squadrons, then called flights, rarely exceeded a dozen planes. Aircraft were fragile, losses were routine, and leaders needed to keep formation small enough for direct command to be effective. During World War II, numbers grew. British squadrons flew with 12 to 16 fighters, while American units pushed closer to 18 or 24. The guiding principle behind every addition was modularity. Units had to be big enough to generate daily combat power, yet small enough that attrition would not cripple an entire wing. During the Cold War, the U.S. codified 24 primary aircraft authorized per squadron. Fighters were to operate tactically in elements of 4, and 24 divides neatly into 6 such flights. This allowed commanders to deploy different combinations, 2, 3, or 4 flights at a time, while leaving others for training and maintenance. The size also fits the human side of the equation. A lieutenant colonel could effectively lead 20 to 30 pilots, supported by a maintenance and logistics team scaled to match. Smaller units lacked punch, larger ones strained command and control. Even today, when cost and availability often trim a squadron to 22 aircraft, the underlying logic endures. Challenging that long-held rule was an ambitious and risky endeavor. The roots of the idea go back to July 2024, when the Air Force quietly shifted 9 F-16s and about 150 airmen from Kunsan to Osan. It was a modest move, but enough to push the 36 up to 31 aircraft, a jump well above the standard 22 that make up an American squadron. In a dramatic turn of events, the experiment gave incredibly positive initial results. Sortie rates ticked up, maintenance bottlenecks eased, and pilots found themselves in the air more often. The conclusion seemed clear. More jets under one command equaled more output. Colonel Peter Kasarskis, chief of the 8th Fighter Wing at Kunsan, tried to frame it as continuity rather than rapture. Quote, We'll meet this change with the same warfighter mindset the Wolfpack has always carried, and will strengthen our ability to accept follow-on forces, defend the base, and take the fight north. His comments hinted at the strategy. Larger formations meant more resilience, more chances to keep aircraft flying, even when parts or crews grew scarce. Encouraged by the numbers, the Air Force's senior staff signed off on a much bigger step in April 2025. This was Phase 2, and it involved 31 more aircraft and nearly 1,000 additional people moving into Osan. Overnight, the 36th Fighter Squadron became the largest single grouping of fighting Falcons in the world. What had been a cautious trial was now a bold gamble. Placing that many jets at Osan meant putting combat muscle directly on the peninsula, only 50 miles from the DMZ. From Osan, F-16s could intercept intruders over Seoul in minutes, sweep for mobile missile launchers before they slipped into mountain tunnels, or surged into combat patrols with almost no delay. The official discourse talked about efficiency, but the placement screamed deterrence. The timing of the expansion left little doubt about its intent. In the months before, analysts exposed another undeclared North Korean missile base at Singpundong. It was only the latest in a string of discoveries: concealed tunnels, camouflage pads, underground bunkers, designed to shelter mobile launchers from surveillance. By mid-2025, estimates put the total number of such installations somewhere between 15 and 20, each capable of coming alive with little to no warning. At the same time, the essence of the threat was changing. North Korea's KN-23 short-range ballistic missile, modeled on Russia's Iskander, flew on a depressed, maneuvering trajectory that made it far harder to intercept than older designs. Other systems with greater range were appearing more frequently in test launches, hinting at ambitions to threaten not just South Korea, but Japan, and eventually the US mainland. For commanders in the region, the logic was stark. As the arsenal grew faster, harder to track, and more numerous, Allied air power had to be closer and stronger. That, in essence, was what the Super Squadron promised. Yet the visual effect of more than 60 F-16s lined up at Osan spoke as loudly as flight times on a map. For Pyongyang, it's a reminder that American air power is not withdrawing anytime soon. In fact, it's massing. For Beijing, it signaled that Washington was experimenting with new ways to stay present despite resource strains. And for Seoul, it was reassurance that the alliance persisted. Still, the same concentration that gave the squadron its power also created its greatest vulnerability. Packing so many jets into Osan made the base a prime target. A single well-timed barrage of short-range missiles could, in theory, overwhelm defenses, crater the runways, and torch aircraft parked wingtip to wingtip. Patriot and THAAD systems ringed the peninsula, but no missile defense is airtight. Sheer numbers could swamp the shield. This vulnerability explained why the Air Force situated the project inside the larger framework of Agile Combat Employment, or ACE. The doctrine rests on a paradox: mass during peacetime, dispense during war. The Super Squadron would train, maintain, and operate from Osan in normal conditions. But the moment a crisis loomed, the plan called for rapid deployment to highway strips, small island runways, or Allied bases scattered across the region. The goal was to complicate an adversary's targeting picture, forcing missiles to strike empty concrete. The squadron was not meant to be a fixed target, but a spring ready to snap outward when the sirens wailed. Whether that vision could survive contact with reality was precisely what Phase 2 sought to uncover. Could such a large unit scatter quickly enough to avoid destruction? Could command and control remain intact when aircraft were flying from sites with only minimal communications infrastructure? Phase 2 is planned to conduct the drills and exercises that will answer these questions. Colonel Ryan Lay, commander of the 51st Fighter Wing at Osan, struck an optimistic note, quote, "I'm proud of what the Mustangs have accomplished already, and I look forward to testing the limits of what we can do over the next year." This task is twofold. It is as much about proving a concept to senior leaders as it is about shaping the daily life of the airmen now crammed into an overgrown squadron. But the implications reach far beyond Osan's crowded flight line. Across the Indo-Pacific, the balance of power was shifting. China's military modernization pressed outward across the South China Sea. North Korea's missile tests multiplied, regional allies questioned whether America's network of bases and forces could keep pace. Against that backdrop, even a narrow experiment like the Super Squadron became part of a larger contest of adaptation. The trial might only last 2 years, but its consequences would stretch well beyond its official end date. Its real measure would come if deterrence failed.